The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
To rebuild the inner cities of America. This campaign is listening to our brothers and sisters in the Latino community. There are 11 million undocumented people in this country. Many of them are being exploited because when you have no legal rights, your employer can do anything he wants to you. Many of them are living in fear, and many of them are living in the shadows. I believe that this country must move forward toward comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. And if Congress does not do its job, I will use the executive powers that the president has to do everything I can.
You're listening live to Bernie Sanders in Washington Park.
This campaign is listening to people whose voice is almost never heard, and that is the people in the Native American community. We owe the Native American people a debt of gratitude we can never repay. And yet, from before this country became a country, Native Americans were lied to and cheated, and treaties they negotiated were broken. Native Americans have taught us so much. They have taught us that we are part of nature, that we have got to live with nature, and that the human species will not survive if we continue to destroy nature. This campaign is listening to young people. And young people are asking a very simple question. They are asking, how does it happen when their parents and their teachers and everybody said to them, go out and get a good education? And they did that. They got the best education they could, and yet they leave school $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 in debt. And sometimes it takes decades for them to pay off that debt. We should be rewarding people who get the education they need, not punishing them.
Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. I wanted to play, and we may cut back to Bernie Sanders live in Washington Square Park in New York. Looking for my glasses here. Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday evening at 9:05 p.m. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you decided to be here with us. We'll cut back to his speech. That is, of course, Bernie Sanders. I had to play a little bit of it because if you see the crowds, if you go online and go to Twitter and look at the crowds, I think they estimate almost 10,000 people have gathered in Washington Square Park to listen to Bernie Sanders give his speech. And right now he's talking about college, the cost of college, and some of the same things that he talks about on a regular basis. And it's good to hear. It's good to see so many people showing up. A lot is happening in the news, and I have an interview tonight with Rania Khalek, and I want to definitely get around to all of those things. So as much as I want to keep listening to Bernie, we've got to talk about the news. Or should we go back and listen to Bernie? No, we'll talk about the news. All right, folks. I want to start with something that's a little heavier than normal. And I want to talk about Boko Haram. And it's really worth us talking about because of the stark contrast of how shocked we are in certain circumstances and how complacent we are in other circumstances. UNICEF reported today out of Senegal, they reported that out of all of the suicide bombings occurring with Boko Haram, 1 in every 5 suicide bombings is committed by, committed by is probably the best word, by a child. The youngest reported bomber is thought to have been 8 years old. And so far, Boko Haram has used 44 children in suicide attacks last year alone. You would remember Boko Haram is the group that kidnapped over 300 young girls from school, and immediately afterwards about a dozen or so escaped, but the rest of them are still missing. It is reported that some of them possibly are being used as human shields. We have a lot of emphasis in our international community on ISIS, and the big question is, what are we going to do as Americans for to stop ISIS? And very little conversations in terms of American intervention, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we don't need to get involved with everything, but our eyes and our ears. It's like out of sight, out of mind. Certain segments of the world, particularly in Africa, we turn a blind eye to the suffering that's being caused by groups like Boko Haram. Over 910 schools have been destroyed. Over 1,500 have been forced to close. 611 teachers have been executed. 19,000 other teachers have been forced to leave. They have essentially, they've kidnapped over 2,000 civilians. They've essentially brought chaos and terror to that entire region, killing thousands of people. And much of nothing is being done about it. Not from our perspective. And when I read the headline that they're using children as bombers, as young as 8 years old, there is I don't like to speak in terms of good and evil, particularly when it comes to world affairs. And even more so, I'm more reluctant to do it in regards to politics. But when you see things like this, all of our emphasis, all of our thoughts, all of our energy is being placed on ISIS. But what are we going to do about Boko Haram? I mean, they are vicious. They are just as deadly. They may not have as big ambitions as ISIS, but the lives that are being taken and the people that are being killed, just as ruthless. And it's this is just the next level. 1 in 5 suicide bombings committed by Boko Haram has been forced. A child has been forced to participate in it, as young as 8 years old. I don't know. I don't know if I want to draw that into the bigger conversation of the role that America plays in the international community. But I do want to point out the selective role that we play in the international community. If nothing else, we do have selective participation in a lot of cases, a lot of things we decide to get involved with, and then other things we just completely ignore. Let me talk about the Verizon debate, not the Verizon debate, the Verizon strike today. Let me start at the funny part about this, and several things that stand out the most to me about this this strike. One is, before midday was good, Bernie Sanders, being Bernie Sanders, showed up and joined the picket line with the union workers, with those people on strike from Verizon. About 6 hours later, Hillary Clinton showed up for the photo opportunity and joined. I don't know if she didn't necessarily join, but she showed up and shook hands with the people, with the protesters. never mind the fact of the relationship and the financial relationship Hillary Clinton has with Verizon executives. She could not pass up the opportunity for Bernie Sanders to demonstrate the level of unity and the level of solidarity that Bernie Sanders has with working class Americans. And that's something that you can't fake that authenticity. You know, you can show up, you can shake hands, you can, do all these things to try to feign this solidarity, but people see right through it. And that's the first thing that stood out to me. The other thing that jumped out to me on my way to work this morning was reading the Globe. And, in the midst of this strike, Verizon took out a full page ad in the Globe. Basically, I'm trying to find it, asking the question, what's there to strike about? And in this ad, Verizon made it seem as though they had it made. Verizon workers had it made. Like they absolutely have no reason to complain, because the average worker makes about, according to that ad, about $130,000 a year. Never mind the fact that they're mixing in executive compensation, which artificially inflates that amount, right? But they said that they have outstanding compensation, they have high quality health care, they have exceptional benefits, and they have all these types of perks. And so the question in their ad was, what's there to strike about? Well, one of the reasons Verizon is out there striking is because some of those benefits and some of the security Verizon is absolutely after. They're after, and it's the same. It's the classic case of corporations, executives trying to increase their bottom line at the expense of labor. And so their inability to come to terms on a contract, again, the last time they negotiated was in 2011. They finally came to terms after a brief strike. And now here they are back again, trying to find a mutually agreeable contract. And so they have decided that they had to strike. An article from jwj.org outlines the 5 reasons why this is important for us to pay attention. And some of them are pretty straightforward, explaining the financial strength of Verizon and the decisions that are made to continue to build that financial strength at the expense of capital, instead of using that financial strength to strengthen labor. And I said expense of capital, I meant the expense of labor, right? They want to increase their bottom lines at the expense of labor, instead of using that bottom line to strengthen labor. It's the classic case that we see throughout, honestly, throughout American history. We see this natural tension between capital and labor. But some of the more specifics that they pointed out was the fact that instead of using these dollars to actually bring to the bargaining table, Verizon took dollars to train 15,000 non-union workers to replace the striking workers, so that the impact of the strike is that much more lessened. You know what I'm trying to say. So that's the other thing. So first, they are not using their profits to the benefit of labor. 2, they dismiss labor so much that they're going to spend all of these millions of dollars to train and pay people who are non-union employees to fill in the gap. That's a standard play. And the bottom line is that Verizon is after those union jobs. You have to understand that most organizations, not all, this is not categorical, but most corporations really would rather to never have to deal with unions, and anything they can do to weaken unions, even if it's from a financial perspective, from the negotiation table, even through politics, everything that they can do to weaken unions, they absolutely will, because they would rather negotiate, or not even got to take the word negotiate out. They would rather deal with individual by individual than a collective of unionized workers any day. Walmart indirectly shut down locations based on that location starting to show the power of organization of their workers, right? This is how entrenched this idea is in corporate America. These large businesses, they absolutely do not want to see their workers unionize because there's strength in numbers. There's the ability to walk out and to strike and for collective bargaining. And this is just absolutely what they do not want. And of course, we all know Verizon's tax. Here, before I go into the history of Verizon's tax avoidance and tax benefits that they get, and I think it was 0.5% of effective tax rate that they've paid over the last 5 years. 0.5% of effective tax rate. The CEO. Bernie Sanders is making some enemies in high places. You know, I guess that's to be expected. But the CEO of Verizon got in on the game of attacking Bernie Sanders because, you know, Bernie Sanders is out there. Bernie Sanders is out there calling out Verizon. He's out there calling out GE. He's calling out these big corporations who are avoiding paying their fair share in the United States, who are doing things to the detriment of their own workers, to the benefit of their bottom line. He's calling it out, and nobody else is calling it out. And anytime you find someone with such such broad influence, such far-reaching influence, speaking out so directly against corporate interest, you will find corporations losing it. And so we've seen it in less than a week. You had the CEO of GE, and now today the CEO of Verizon come out basically dismissing Bernie Sanders as a demagogue, promoting their policies and their treatment of their workers as just being the best in anywhere in the world. And basically saying there's nothing to see here because, as the article said, or not the article, as the ad said in the Globe today, what's there to strike about? And there's a concerted effort to make anyone who dare organize and make demands and demand concessions from their employers to make them look like they're ungrateful. And to put this number in this ad, right, of $130,000, knowing full well that the average worker at Amazon at Verizon does not make nearly that much, right? But it gives the impression that you have a bunch of ungrateful workers who are just demanding more and more and more, when in reality, you have unionized workers who are trying to maintain their jobs, trying to maintain some of the basic benefits, trying to maintain their ability to keep their job here locally or in the United States. Some of those jobs are trying to be outsourced. Some of the jobs are being not necessarily outsourced, but relocated, forcing families to have to relocate. They just want some basic standard security, but they're being labeled as disgruntled, never satisfied, money-hungry unions. Meanwhile, the CEO, I believe the CEO's last I checked was making, the CEO of Verizon is making $18 million a year, which is cool. Make your money. But what about your workers? What about the people who you are building this money on top of? And a part of me is like, this conversation is something that we have almost every other week. This is honestly, it's a conversation that happens every single day because you realize that this is not going away. This tension, this fight between corporations, let's take the word corporations out. The fight between capital and labor is not going anywhere. It's always here, and the question is, where are we going to place the priority as a nation? Are we placing the emphasis and the priority on the capital side of the equation? Or are we going to put the emphasis and the focus on the labor side of the equation? And for a very long time, America has chosen to put the emphasis on the capital side of the equation. At least for the last 40 years. At least for the last 40 years, we have put all of our chips inside of capital, all of our investments inside of capital, and to the detriment of labor. because we play it as a zero-sum game. I don't want to get into that entire conversation because there's so much more to cover. But that's the gist of it. So it's another strike. It's another corporation. It's another big business who are trying to cut union jobs, who are trying to get, and I guess the question is, what do you expect? Verizon's trying to do everything it can to maximize their profits. And one of the most attractive places to do that is on the backs of labor. And it's the same exact story. And this is why they're going after Bernie Sanders so much. They're going after Bernie Sanders so much is because he is casting this narrative, not only based on a localized scenario, but he's casting it in terms of a globalized scenario, because the more we expose the American worker to the full force of globalized labor, the more companies like Verizon and Apple and other large corporations will continue to outsource jobs, because why pay here in the United States $45,000 a year for what you can get for 45 cents a day? The bottom line for me is that we need to realize that every good business decision is not necessarily a good decision for America or for the average American. Yes, it's a good business decision sometimes to outsource your manufacturing, for example. But is every good business decision the best decision for the United States of America and for the average American? Absolutely not. And that's been proven time and time again. Yet we still go underneath this fallacy that anything that's good for business is good for America. And now even your Democratic Party has bought into this. All right, I want to go over one last thing before I bring on Rania. I want to talk about this op-ed out of the New York Times by Elizabeth Hinton, Julie Kohler-Hausman, and Velsa Weaver. And the op-ed was about, did blacks back the crime bill? So first, let me start here. You got to give a nod to Black Lives Matter. I don't care. The slogan, the organization, and the people on the ground. You got to give a nod to them, because they have forced a conversation about the 1994 crime bill that, if not for them, we would just have accepted it as something that was a necessary evil, or not even a necessary evil. We would have looked at it as something that was just done and it made us safer. Right. But because of Black Lives Matter, we are actually having a conversation in earnest about the decision that was made to that really catapulted incarceration in the United States, particularly incarceration of African Americans, particularly for nonviolent drug offenders. And in the midst of this conversation, Hillary Clinton herself has admitted that the legacy of the 1994 crime bill is problematic. You have Bill Clinton, who doubled down on it because he didn't like being challenged by Black Lives Matter. And you have everyone trying to bring Bernie Sanders into the mix because he voted for the 1994 crime bill because of a piece of an amendment in it that he absolutely has been supporting for a very long time, the Violence Against Women Act, which was tied to the same bill. And so we have this entire relitigation of the 1994 crime bill. And one of the more nefarious, to me, talking points that have been used to defend the Clintons is the talking point that, the 94 crime bill had to be okay because Black people supported it. And this is where the op-ed in the New York Times came in today, essentially saying, no, it wasn't that African Americans supported it. It was that white progressives, quote unquote progressives, particularly Bill Clinton and the team putting this and pushing this through, had selective hearing. And they only heard what they wanted to hear from the people they wanted to hear it from. They didn't listen to Jesse Jackson. If you saw the clip going around of Jesse Jackson today, basically laying it bare, saying that this piece of legislation could not pass if it came from a Republican. That's how horrible the legislation was. This is Jesse Jackson saying this at that time. And even some of the people who John Lewis also opposed this legislation. And And even some of the people who said we do need to crack down on crime, but we also need full employment. We also need investments in education. We also need investment in better housing. We also need all of these other things that should complement any type of crackdown on crime. But instead of listening to Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, and the African Americans who supported the bill with caveats, they ignored all of the caveats and just gave them the crime portion of the bill. And so all of these people running around today, and it's in the saddest and I guess funniest, sad and funny, it's opposite side of the same coin, is you have black people running around touting the support of African American leaders in the 90s for this bill, when in reality, many African American leaders stood up against the bill, and those that supported it only supported it with caveats. Sort of like Bernie Sanders supporting it with the caveat of removing the more nefarious effects that would be felt by the African American community. He expressly said this. He expressly said and pointed out the things in the bill that he saw was going to be detrimental, but never mind the nuance, never mind the context. Black people supported it and Bernie Sanders voted for it. So since black people supported it, it's okay for Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. But because Bernie Sanders voted for it, he needs to take full responsibility of all the negative things in it. Do you see how the game is played? That's how the game is played. They simultaneously tried to absolve the Clintons by virtue of their black cover, right? You cover them because you had some black people who just like the guy from the Hamilton skit with Bill de Blasio and Hillary Clinton, the colored people time joke, right? As long as that black brother was there to say, oh, it's okay, then obviously it's okay. And it's much to do about nothing. And likewise, because there were some black people who supported the 94 crime bill, then it must be okay for the Clintons to have not only supported, but actually signed it into law. But at the same time, Bernie Sanders, he voted for it, so he needs to apologize. This is the cognitive dissonance that's coming from these people on an everyday basis. And I love the op-ed from the New York Times because it exposes the fundamental lie that even though you had black people who supported the 94 crime bill, they supported it with a litany of caveats that were all ignored by your local friendly neighborhood white progressive. And that reminds me, every time you hear a black person or anybody, a white person for that matter, say, oh, yeah, but black people supported it. Think about Fox News. Think about how Fox News can go and get any black person to support anything. And so long as they get some black person to support the most ridiculously offensive thing on Fox News, well, then they're not racist and everything has to be okay. All right. Enough of that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Well, you know what? I'm going to let her introduce herself because I do a pretty bad job of introducing people. But I want her to come on, and I want you to welcome Rania Khalek. And I heard her on. First of all, I've been reading her tweets for a little while, and I've read her articles for a little while, but I had a chance to hear her on the Majority Report this week, and I reached out to her and told her I had to have her on the show. Rania, how are you? Thanks so much for joining me. Hey, thanks so much for having me on. It's good to be with you. I'm sorry. I think that's my fault. Say that again. How are you today? I'm good. Thanks so much for having me on. It's really good to be with you. My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for joining us. So before we start talking about politics, tell everybody about yourself. Introduce yourself. I'm sure my listeners already know who you are, right? But again, I want to give you a chance to let you speak for yourself. Well, if they don't know who I am, like you said, my name is Rania Khalek, and I am a journalist. I write for the Electronic Intifada. I typically cover issues related to Israel-Palestine, but I also write for other outlets here and there as well. I like your bio on Twitter. You said you're a journalist with an opinion. And, I appreciate that candor because I think people fail to realize, or not people, I think journalists fail to realize that in some capacity, they do have an opinion. So, what made you say that? Do you run into that often where you're expected to not have an opinion?
Well, I mean, I think journalists in general are expected to not have opinions. It's sort of the mainstream idea of what journalism means. But I am totally opposed and reject the idea of objectivity. I don't think it's possible to be objective on a number of issues. I think it's natural to have biases and opinions. And I prefer to be honest about that instead of pretending to not have one. And I also think being objective oftentimes ends up serving power. Because you end up, instead of just telling your viewers or listeners or readers what the facts are, it ends up being this game of he said this and she said that, and I'm just going to leave it to you to decide because I just want to stay objective and neutral. And there's some issues you just can't be neutral on.
I'm trying to think who I was reading this week that actually made that point so clear. There was an entire piece about it, or maybe it was a series of tweets where they were discussing how this position of neutrality actually is not really tenable when you're dealing with certain issues. And they brought up the example of NPR, right, where NPR tries to give both sides of or tries to make it seem like there's two valid sides of an argument, and then when they're done, it's kind of a wash. And I have to find out who that was, because everything you just said reminded me of that, which is why I have a lot of respect for journalists, but I'm glad to be doing commentary because I have so many opinions. I don't think I can make it a day.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's no, I think there's certainly a place definitely for straightforward reporting that's important. But when it comes to issues like climate change, for example, and that's one thing that like you mentioned, NPR and other news outlets did for a really long time. They do it less now, but they used to treat the climate deniers as though they had valid opinions when, 99% of scientists say that climate change is real. And so the issues like that, it skews the way that the public ends up viewing very, very serious and important issues. You have like a significant portion of the public that believes climate change isn't real because they're being told by people that are being presented as people with serious opinions that it isn't. And so, yeah, that's where it starts to be very dangerous, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was the quintessential example for me. And then we're going to talk about politics in a second. Well, this is politics. We'll talk about the race in a second. But the quintessential example for me was when I was listening to NPR and they were doing an interview with Ted Cruz, and they allowed Ted Cruz to use the fact that his mother was a scientist as justification for him opposing NASA climate data and dismissing NASA climate data as something that was wrong. And he was right because his mother was a scientist. And at that point, I just threw my hands up. I'm like, come on. You can't try to be that unbiased that you can leave something like that hanging in midair. So I think it's a perfect example. But yeah,
it's a huge reason why the right has been able to make a lot of the arguments that it's made for the past couple decades is because they've been treated, some of their ridiculous and most absurd arguments have been treated as legitimate by the sort of like, we have to treat both sides equally frame of thinking.
Yes. Absolutely. Great. That was a bonus. That was for free. I didn't realize we could have that conversation. That's a clip by itself. Great commentary there. Let's talk about the race. I had a chance to read 2 articles of yours. One in The Nation, where you co-wrote with, I believe, 3 other authors. And then the piece that you wrote for the site that you write for, both of them dealing with the race and Hillary Clinton. It's really, I guess there's like 3 different angles that I want to come from, but I want to ask you first about the Nation piece. And in the Nation, you were discussing how the question was whether or not you could support Hillary Clinton. And too long didn't read. No, you said, you know, if I read it correctly, it seems like you just straight out could not support Hillary Clinton. And you listed quite a few reasons. Tell me a little bit about that piece. And did I hear you right?
So the argument that we're hearing a lot from more like progressive-minded and liberal pundits is that if Bernie Sanders does not win and Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee, that it's no question. Of course, you'd have to vote for her because look who she's running against. And they usually point to Donald Trump. And so my argument to that is, well, when I look at Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and assuming that lesser evilism, right, is the goal, I can't actually tell who the lesser evil is. I mean, obviously, when it comes to language and rhetoric, it's pretty clear that Hillary Clinton is much less offensive, right? She's more respectable in her tone, and she doesn't, she's not riling up the sort of fascist sentiments that Donald Trump is. although I do think that Hillary Clinton has played a role in creating and the conditions that have given a rise to a lot of those sentiments that are coalescing around Trump with her corporate policies. But I'll mention that in a second. But the point is, when it comes to comparing the two, I mean, you've got someone like Trump who's saying he wants to ban Muslims, which is very, very bad. But then you have someone like Hillary Clinton who has actually bombed, like who's actually supported policies of bombing Muslims and supports more policies that include bombing Muslims. And so we're being told to choose between someone who wants to ban Muslims and bomb Muslims. And to me, that is a choice I cannot make. Those are two atrocious outcomes that I can't decide between. And it goes beyond that, and I can go further. And you look like you have a follow up to it.
No, I'm just listening. I'll jump in there. Go for it.
Well, beyond that, I mean, just in general, when it comes to issues of world stability, Trump is being presented as somebody who's very dangerous in the sense that, he wants to do really bad things around the world. And that's not necessarily wrong, but Hillary Clinton is extremely hawkish and arguably more hawkish than Donald Trump. In fact, her political leanings when it comes to foreign policy and her record put her more in line with neoconservatives, the people who brought us the Iraq War, than any sort of liberal-minded person. Whereas somebody like Donald Trump has been expressing more isolationist sentiments, where he's talking about reducing America's military presence abroad. And this is something that he's consistently said. And I'm not in any way, let me be clear, advocating for Donald Trump because he says that. My point is just to say that when you compare the two on that issue, on foreign policy, Hillary Clinton is somebody who has played a role in several regime overthrows, particularly during her time at State Department and the coup in Honduras, which was completely disastrous and has led to record levels of violence in that country that sent children fleeing for their lives. And then when those children from Honduras came to the US and crossed the border on journeys that were very, very dangerous, that's how desperate they were, Hillary Clinton came out and said that those children should be sent back. She advocated for deporting children who had come from places like Honduras back to the violence that they fled to send a message to their parents. And that was a violent level of violence that she contributed to causing. And that's something she's not sorry for. That's another thing is, she regrets the Iraq war vote, right? She rejects regime change in Iraq. But at the same time, it hasn't changed her going forward. She still supports the coup in Honduras and still defends it, which she did in her Daily News article or her Daily News interview recently. And she also supported regime change in Libya. The war in Libya, the bombing of Libya and the overthrow of Gaddafi is a policy that Hillary Clinton spearheaded. That is the only reason the Obama administration did what they did in Libya, because Hillary Clinton persuaded them to. And it was an absolute disaster and has led to conditions that have given rise to ISIS inside Libya. So this is an ongoing pattern with Hillary Clinton that she doesn't oppose. She has not, she hasn't expressed any regret. In fact, she still believes in the righteousness of U.S. regime change and says so. So that's very, very disturbing to me. She's a very hardcore militarist that, and then there's the other issue, which we can get into more, is Israel. I mean, she has aligned herself not just with Israel, as most U.S. politicians do. She has aligned herself with the most hardcore right-wing elements in Israel. That is very, very disturbing.
Let me jump back here because you said something that I don't, talking points are very powerful. And I'm not minimizing what you're saying as a talking point, but it's a hell of a talking point. You have one candidate, if it comes down to Trump and Hillary Clinton, one wants to ban Muslims, the other one wants to bomb Muslims. That is a tremendous indictment against this decision that they're trying to force us to face, right? And I don't know if many people have just heard it that simplified, and I think that's what makes it very, very powerful and hit me like a ton of bricks when you said it. Ban or bomb, and then the question you got to go one step further and say, will Donald Trump have the capacity and the authority to actually implement that policy? No. Does Hillary Clinton have the capacity and the authority to continue her policy? Yes. So, you make a hell of a case right there. And I don't think I could push back on that particular instance of your argument. But I do want to unpack it a little bit more because your politics, and I read your tweets and I read your works, your politics leans progressive. So how do you, in this climate of Hillary feminism, progressivism, but you would abstain from voting for Hillary Clinton. How does that fall in your life, in just your world in particular, with other progressives, with other liberals, with Democrats, and feminists? Like, you have to be a pariah in a certain extent.
You know, here's the thing. I don't blame people or fault them, especially like the other liberals and progressives. I understand if they come November decide to vote for Hillary Clinton against a Donald Trump type figure. Like, I totally get that, and I respect that. I'm not telling other people not to. I'm just saying I can't in good conscience do it. And I think it's important to recognize why, because I'm not the only person who feels that way. And so I think it's an indictment of our political system. The fact that you have people feeling as disillusioned as someone like me does, to where if it comes down to bombing Muslims or banning Muslims, I mean, if that's all we're being offered, it speaks to the fact that, you know, we don't really live in a democracy if there's not a candidate that a significant portion of people feel represents any of their views. And in many ways, I mean, Hillary Clinton, in some cases, yeah, sure, she represents some of my views in this, but they're really shallow views, you know, like she speaks in a nicer way, sure. Like, and in terms of just, you know, being, you know, respecting diversity, I guess, if you will, things like this, like the more respectable tone she has, I agree with, yes, more than I would a Republican on the abortion issue. So there are those kinds of issues that are important to like recognize and understand. And that's why, I mean, I don't fault other people who would vote for her, but I do at times feel like a pariah when it comes to this kind of stuff, especially since, I mean, there's a number of reasons. First is the issue of that Hillary Clinton's a woman, right? And so if you're not a woman, or if you're a woman and you're not voting for her or supporting her right now, that comes down on you. And then there's the fact that Bernie Sanders supporters, which I am one of them, are being portrayed as like these white guys. And I'm not a white guy. Like, I'm not a white guy. I feel like in a lot of ways I'm being ignored in that sense, to try and portray him as some sort of like white leader of like a white pack. And it's not fair to do that. But I also think that there's something more troubling happening on, like, not necessarily all of the left, but a segment of the left and liberals, which is this sort of obsession with language that bothers me. And that's when it gets to the identity politics. And that's what really frustrates me, especially as it's really frustrated me throughout this election, is the way that everything's discussed and talked about in terms of, like, especially with Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's almost like there's a grad student that's writing some of her speeches. She's using the language of intersectionality and white privilege. I mean, could you ever imagined in a million years Hillary Clinton asking white people to check their privilege repeatedly? I mean, she did it today again, telling white people they need to listen to black people. I mean, I'm not necessarily against those things, but at the same time, you're like a multimillionaire who's done really terrible things to communities of color. Like, how can you sit there and talk about that? And then there's also this whole idea of this, a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters are using that sort of identity politics to try and shut down class issues and discussion of economic inequality. And, you know, that's where, like, I'm more Marxist leaning in that sense. I'm a socialist, you know, like, and that bothers me, especially because class and race are so mixed up. Go ahead.
Let's back up and unpack that, because you've hit on something that I talk about ad nauseum on this show. I like it drives me insane. One, yes, she had to have hired, somebody tweeted it out a long time ago. Props to whatever PhD candidate got the job as speechwriter for Hillary Clinton, right? Because they have been lending and loaning Hillary Clinton the language of intersectionality for the last, I would get at least the last 6 months of this race, right? So she's hitting all the points on intersectionality, and she's doing it seamlessly, and it's so perfect in some cases that you realize it's absolutely not her, especially when you see her unscripted and you see her reaction and you see the way that she has this condescension that just flows naturally from her, so much more naturally than her tweets. That's number one. But then two, the other thing that you hit on that I want to unpack is their usage of this language of, I guess, intersectionality again, of respectability, not respectability politics, but identity politics is what I'm looking for. This language of identity politics to the detriment of class. And I think it has created a fissure, a division in the party or in this left-leaning side of America, where you're either going to focus on identity or you want to focus on class. And I think it has been just so exposed by this race in particular because of Hillary Clinton's manipulation of identity politics. I just want you to unpack that a little bit more and some of the examples that you've seen and why it frustrates you, I think, as much as it frustrates me.
Well, there's a number of things she's done. I mean, one of the most notorious is saying that, is breaking up the big banks going to fix racism? Is it going to fix homophobia? Is it going to fix sexism? No. I mean, these kinds of things where you see how neoliberals like Hillary Clinton have been able to use the language of identity to shut down issues related to economic inequality. And that's what neoliberalism really is all about. It's all about hiring Black and brown CEOs to say, we fixed it, you guys, like we fixed it. That's the problem. That's why, I mean, that's what the Democratic Party is about and has done for a while now, is it's pretty right wing when it comes to economics. It's been for several decades since, Bill Clinton came to office. It's completely abandoned working class issues. And everything is about language and how you talk and making sure you use the respectable kind of language. And that's where identity politics comes in. I mean, I think identity politics, maybe there's a place for diversity, of course. Like there should be more diverse, boardrooms. There should be more diverse, the Congress should be more diverse. The cabinet of the president should be more diverse. We should have presidents who aren't white men, yes. At the same time, I think it's really important that we recognize how in a lot of ways that is how the establishment has been able to dupe us into thinking that we're making progress, when in fact, when it comes to economic inequality, it's been the complete opposite. You've got, larger, wealth inequality is higher than it's been in decades, it's like things like this. You have people who are like really struggling to get by. The middle class is shrinking. People are getting poorer. These, this is very important to recognize and understand because, and I think it is, I think this election has really brought it to the fore. And I think with a lot of the more prominent pundits that you see arguing in favor of Hillary Clinton, it's easy for them to see diversity as the answer to everything, to see just having more Black and brown faces as the answer, because they don't have to deal with high health insurance costs. They can afford to pay for everything. They don't need free college. I'm talking about, like the people who are most hardcore in the news media that are for Hillary. They don't have to deal with these things. So it's easier for them to just kind of push that aside and just be about, we want a woman president, yay. But like for millennials, though, especially I think you see the numbers of women millennials who are, like 70% for Bernie. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that millennials are struggling more economically than, our parents were, or even like a couple, or like one generation above us is. And so it's just really frustrating to see the conversation go that way. But I think it also is very good. I've been a critic of some of the way identity politics has functioned on the left, especially on college campuses. Like I've been somewhat of a critic of that. And I do have to say it's really refreshing that college campuses are actually, the most vibrant and electric places for Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Because I think that demonstrates a rejection of the way that neoliberalism tries to use identity politics to get people on the left to support the Hillary Clinton type figures.
And that has been, and here's the problem, right? The problem in my opinion is that, there have been so many fights that we've had to fight in regards to identity, for minorities, for the LGBTQ community, for, just across the board. There's so many issues that we've had to fight that needed to be fought. Yes. But now it's at the point where they've taken it to a level where it has become useful against their own party, against their own, and I guess what the thing that really is sobering is that you have to come full circle and say, if they're so willing to use identity politics to the detriment of what we thought were their values and their progressive values, you really have to ask yourself, did they ever have these progressive values in the first place? Because it looks like, to me, this primary looks like the death pangs of liberalism. Like neoliberalism is fighting for its life. It's fighting not only for its life, but it's fighting for control. And it's just kicking and flailing its legs and arms, to doing everything it can to suppress progressivism. And now I'm like, did these people ever believe this? Was it just always a convenient mechanism to usher in a right-leaning economic Democratic Party?
I mean, I think for the Clintons, it's the second thing. It's a lot of what you said. They've never been progressives. I mean, they came in, they're a part of the wing of the Democrats, the New Democrats, right? And they came in with the idea of really getting rid of that more progressive agenda to be centrist so that they don't lose the country, after the country was really conservative back in the 80s. And in order to win it back, they wanted to veer right instead of stay left, and that's what happened. And so, and at first, I think one thing that's really interesting is that under Bill Clinton, I think what the Democrats tried to do, or the New Democrats tried to do, is they tried to employ the Southern strategy in their own way. Like with the way that Bill Clinton, tried to get white working class voters to come back to the Democratic Party. And it didn't really work. And so instead they ended up, aligning with corporate, like the corporate America. That's the Democratic Alliance became corporate America and minority voters, and then more progressive minded white people. And that's kind of how it's been for a while. But I think that that's cracking right now because of the economic situation in this country. And I think it's been to the detriment of everybody, because a lot of the people I think that are coalescing around Donald Trump right now are people that have been completely abandoned by the Democratic Party. I'm not excusing the violence and racism we see at Donald Trump rallies. However, I think it's important to understand that Donald Trump is also using an identity politics, right? Yep. He's employing identity politics by appealing to racism and xenophobia, and he's appealing to people who are doing poorly right now, people who are hurting, and whether they're putting that anger and pain into the wrong place. I mean, you have to recognize that white working class and poor America is hurting right now. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really short-sighted, especially when I see like the more Clinton type voters. It's really, really short-sighted to just kind of dismiss all the Donald Trump voters. Yeah. Dismiss all those people as just racist people who shouldn't be reached out to at all and can't be saved in any way. Mm-hmm. And I actually think that's why this election's so important, because if you really want to beat someone like Donald Trump, you have to understand that the movement he's created, the momentum he's created, it's not going to go away once he's gone, and it's going to go somewhere. And I think the message that Bernie Sanders is offering is kind of like one of the few antidotes to the sort of anger that you see around Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton is just the epitome of everything those people hate, right? Like, she's just this establishment corporate.
Politically correct, identity politics, pandering, that, she is, I can't reiterate that enough. She is the epitome of what they hate about liberals, about the Democratic Party. But you hit on something else here, and let me know, you just throw the flag up when you have to go. You hit on something else, this idea that we are often as progressives jumped on because we see some redeeming values in the people on the right who have economic gripes, and they have gripes with how this system is working out. We're foolish enough, I think we're naive enough to think that we can convince them that the solution is a more progressive solution versus what they've been propagandized with for a very long time, to think that it's a more conservative solution. I think that might be some naivete, particularly for people like me. I think we can convince them. But from the identity politics side of that conversation, I know you've been jumped on for saying what you just said. Like, why would you go after these people who are racist? Why would you go after these people who are xenophobic? Why would you go after these people who want to ban Muslims? All so that you can get Bernie Sanders elected. What does that look like in your experience?
Well, it is. It's frustrating because, I do get jumped on for that kind of stuff. But like, here's the thing is, when it comes to, there's not very many progressives in this country. I mean, just in sheer numbers, if you do want to change anything in this country, you have to recognize that you do need to be able to reach out to other people besides liberals who speak your language. Mm-hmm. It's like in sheer numbers, we just don't make enough. We're not enough of the country to force what we want to happen. Mm-hmm. But on top of that, if we want things to change economically, it's like, you got to be able to organize people who want the same things you do in that sense. And so that's like, when it comes to class, that's an issue that the majority of people can organize around. I mean, that's kind of what socialism is all about, is when it comes to class, it's like class interests typically end up trumping everything else. no pun intended, but they do. And so it's really like, it's important to be able to reach out to those people because of that, because of the fact that they have a stake in wanting free healthcare. You know, they have a stake in wanting rich people to pay more taxes. They have a stake in free education. And that's what's important, not to like try and convince them out of morals, but just the basic like everyday survival issues. You know, there are similar stakes that we have. But beyond that, you know, I think it's actually like, there's also like, if you don't want, so I think that neoliberalism is actually it creates the conditions for fascism. It really does. It creates the conditions for hatred. It creates the conditions where you can divide people and really like help and appeal to their really worst sensibilities, which is what someone like Donald Trump is doing. And so I actually do fear that another 4 years of, or even 8 years of someone like Hillary Clinton, passing more trade policies that are detrimental to U.S. workers, and also lecturing. I mean, lecturing poor and working class white people about using proper language. It's just going to make them angrier, like it's the kinds of, and especially with her condescending like attitude towards things. I think it's really going to create conditions that can give rise to a demagogue even more dangerous than Donald Trump. And that's what I'm trying to convey and say when I say these things. I'm not trying to say that we should be reaching out to the KKK. That's like not, that's not my point here. But the point is that I do think that people, beyond what the media does show us, when it comes to the people who are supporting Trump, they are also supporting him for reasons that have a lot to do with reasons that people might support someone like Bernie Sanders. And it's because they're hurting economically, but in the case of Trump supporters, they haven't been given a framework for understanding their condition, because we don't really have a left in this country that has a big platform. And they've been fed, these stories by places like Fox News about why the economy is doing poorly. But like when you offer a counter narrative to that, it can be powerful. And I think it's like that needs to be understood. And maybe that's naive on my part, but I think that history actually shows us that, appealing to people's economic situations is a way to actually bring people together.
I think it's naivete, but I'm foolish enough to just be naive and still fight it anyway. I honestly believe part of the problem is that we have intentionally weak representations of progressivism in the media. And I use that phrase specifically because at first I thought they were weak just because they were weak. But I think at this point it's intentional because they don't want real strong progressive voices represented in the media. And you could see the classic case of Cenk Uygur being chased away from MSNBC because those counter narratives that really could latch hold into the minds of the common threads that we have with poor white working class people who tend to identify as conservatives, they don't want that solidarity to ever come about. And so for all of my life, and I'm guessing all of your life, all we've had is this watered down neoliberal economic version of progressivism, which is going to lead me to my last question here. Why aren't you? I have a suspicion, but why don't I see you more on CNN and MSNBC? And because you have a large following and you have a really strong voice, but we don't get to hear from you on national media much.
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. And one of them is what you just explained about, sort of limiting how far progressivism gets to go in the mainstream media. Mm-hmm. But the other issue is that I cover the issue of Israel-Palestine, and I'm very vocal about where I stand on that. And, I'm very much pro-Palestine, I'm pro-equality. So I'm pro-Palestine. I'm very much against the way that Israel functions. And so because I'm very loud about that does put me in a position where I do get boxed out, intentionally so. And that's the case for a lot of people who cover the issue in a similar way that I do. And I mean, I don't just cover Israel-Palestine, but it's an issue that if you do speak out on it, I mean, just look at Bernie Sanders talking, just all he's done the past couple of weeks talking about Gaza and just saying that people, civilians in Gaza were killed and Israel used disproportionate force, which is what every single independent investigation by the UN, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, any organization, even Israeli human rights groups, you name it, have found. Just him saying that has invited this intense backlash against him from figures in the mainstream press and from even Israeli government officials, which is bizarre. But yeah, so I mean, just looking at that, you can see there's a lot of hostility towards any sort of opinion that is challenging towards like the status quo and the consensus around the Israel-Palestine situation, which is presented in a completely distorted way in the U.S. media. So unfortunately, those are the two reasons I just get boxed out. And I think that happens to a lot of people on the left who have similar opinions that I do.
And I'm chuckling because that's the number one tactic. But you know, there's a shift. I think there's a shift in the momentum of new media, online media, as well as a decline in mainstream media, particularly these outlets that claim to be the progressive voices. So there's obviously there's a, to use a capitalistic term, there's an opportunity, right? There is an investment opportunity because there's a big gap in terms of progressive media. And the question is, will anybody come in and seize that opportunity? But I digress. That's a whole different conversation. Rania, thank you so much for joining me. We probably, actually, there's still a whole lot. We didn't even talk about the second article, but I want to bring you back to talk about the second article, Hillary Clinton and her AIPAC speech and her relationship to the far right wing in Israel. I definitely want to unpack that. So can I get you back on the air another time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on. This was a great conversation. And I really, your show is wonderful. And the things that you're talking about are so important. So I appreciate that as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, I really tell everyone how they can get up with you and where they can find you.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Rania Khalek, and then also I write pretty regularly at the Electronic Intifada, and I also my website too. I try and post my work there. It's raniakhalek.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much, and I look forward to having you back. This is Rania Khalek, ladies and gentlemen. Go follow her on Twitter and all the places. We'll be sure to share all of your links. Thanks so much for joining us. All right, folks, I will not end this show without giving you a chance to participate. 857-600-0518. I want you to give me a call, tweet me at the BPD show. What did you think about the conversation with Rania? I think it was, it's amazing. I meant to ask her this, and if Rania, if you're listening, or I'll tweet you later, how long have you been making this argument of neoliberalism using the language of intersectionality to really oppose progressivism, right? Because to me, that's the thesis of this election cycle, right? But I wonder, I know that argument has been made for a long time by people on the left. I know the Black Agenda Report, Bruce Dixon and the guys over there, they've been making that argument for a while. But I wanted to know how long you've been making that argument. So I'll circle back to you. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, Ben, what's going on?
Hey, Bryce, how's it going, man? Thanks for the call.
Did you all get a chance to check out Bernie went to the Verizon protest?
Yep.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
No, I said, did you get a chance to see Bernie go to the Verizon protest?
Yeah. No, I saw him went. I saw him, pick up a sign and joined in on it. Yep. And then I saw Hillary Clinton come like 6 hours later. She wasn't going to let him get the last word.
Yeah, 6 hours later.
Yeah. It's like somebody tweeted her and said, "You better get your butt out here, Hillary." And of course she came. But yeah, I saw that, man. What's up though?
But I like what he did. He always been doing that. So I guess my question is, what do you think it's going to take for Bernie to win New York? I think the last poll he's not down by much. He's kind of closing the gap. What do you think is the chance? What do you think he needs to do to win New York? Does he have a chance? And I think he's going to win California. Something tells me he's going to win California.
Yeah, cool, man. Let me answer that question for you. Let's see. Honestly, what we saw tonight in Washington Square Park, all of those people, and ABC News was covering it live. I think people seeing that type of energy and those key endorsements that he's getting from New York, I think if he has a chance of actually winning, like winning, he's on that track right now. He's on that track right now. I think they're doing they're doing a hell of a good job in New York. He's going to have to do a great job tomorrow night at the debate. Speaking of, we'll be streaming the debate, the audio of the debate tomorrow night. I'll be joined by Nis Peterson, Noah Changa, Solomon Russell, and Nick Nolan. They'll be joining me tomorrow night, and we'll be discussing the debate live. So join us tomorrow night. But yeah, Bernie Sanders is going to need to smash at that debate. He's going to need to answer the question on the Connecticut shootings, his defense of the bill, the exemption, the name escapes me right now, but the Sandy Hook lawsuit. He's going to need to absolutely perform well on that, and he's going to need to put Hillary Clinton away in so many other categories. Tomorrow night it's going to be some fireworks because if Hillary Clinton doesn't win by a commanding margin in her quote unquote home state, which I guess that's her home state now, right? Then that's going to be bad news for her if she doesn't win. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Hi there. This is Wendy from Virginia.
Hi, Wendy. How are you?
Hi. Good, thanks. So I was just calling with a comment somewhat related to what Rania was talking about and what I've also heard her speak about in a separate interview. So recently she was talking with Doug, I believe is his name, who writes for the South Lawn, which is like a Black socialist website. And they were discussing identity politics on the left. And one of the things that I think we have to be careful about, even though I respect their arguments and agree with them in large part, I think we have to be really careful as Bernie supporters or on the progressive left to not get to the point where we're, I think, sort of damning identity politics so much that we find ourselves in sort of a colorblind ideology space. So, I mean, I work on and study Brazil as part of my job as a PhD student. And that's been a big refrain in a lot of Latin American contexts in the past, especially in Brazil. And one of the problems has been that, like, once you get to the point where everything is colorblind, then obviously it's much harder to have a real dialogue about race. So in their instance, or in their case, for a long time, it's been, well, it's just about class. It's just about class. Anyone who talks about race is racist, right? And I think sometimes I've seen similar types of language like popping up, creeping up here and there on the Sanders support or the progressive left. And I think we have to be careful not to get to the point where everything's just about class and we're not also talking about those intersections in a real substantial way, not like the Hillary Clinton way. And I've just noticed that there's been a little bit of dismissiveness. I'm not going to name any names. Some of them are YouTube hosts. But not you. I was like,
hey, but listen, listen, I'll cop to that. I will cop to it in this regard. Seeing the type of manipulation that they're using or how they're using identity politics as a tool of manipulation really makes us have to hit back on it so hard. We have to pull out the big guns and hit back. Now, at the same time, it is a balancing act because you don't want it to completely be erased. But I think this is what Rania was talking about at the end, is that when you have people who manipulate based on identity politics so much, it actually weakens the position and not the position, but the efficacy of identity politics, right? Because people become numb to it because you've used it as a tool of manipulation when we needed to be using it to fix some of the wrongs that are not as many of the wrongs as we possibly could throughout in America, right? We need identity politics to fix some of these problems, but now it's like they've jumped the shark. Like they've gone so far where you can't even say Southern without them calling you a racist, right? That's where we are now. And so I agree with you. It is a balancing act. And I think the solution that white progressives should recognize would be to allow one to listen, right? And I hate to use that phrase because that's manipulated too in this present day, but listen to voices that understand the balance, There is a need for identity politics, but Hillary and her team have taken it so far that it's detrimental to identity politics. So I hear you loudly and clearly. What are you, your PhD? What's your field? Oh, did I lose you?
I think there was no, I'm here. There's a bit of weird reception on my end. But I agree that I agree with the idea of having a balance. I've seen some commentary, for example, in reaction to the jokes that Hillary made with de Blasio recently. Again, like I said, I'm not going to name names.
I think I know the name.
Commentary that's been really dismissive, and I think we just have to be careful not to be dismissive of the.
I guess I'm gonna go. I'll go head on over there and watch his video. I know who you're talking about. Somebody else has been telling me. Thanks for the call. Has been telling me all day that I need to go watch that video. I'll go watch the video, and if it strikes the nerve the right way, I'll respond to the video. Because there is a, I agree with you. All right, I have time for one more call, 857-600-0518, or I will read some questions out of the chat room and answer them there. And I'm also checking at the BPD show to see your questions and your, let's see, ban or bomb. Yes, that was a great conversation with Rania. I want to thank her again for coming on. She was getting rave reviews from some of my producers. It was a great conversation. All right, 417, you are live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Hi, this is Ray from Missouri.
Hey, Ray from Missouri. How's it going?
I wanted to talk a little bit about what Rania said about reaching out to Trump supporters.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Go for it.
So I think she made a very good point. Here in Missouri, we're a very conservative state, but I transformed, a whole family of white Trump supporters into Bernie supporters just by actually teaching them about, trickle-down economics. They didn't even understand what the Republican, economic policy even was. And whenever you actually start talking to them and really teaching them, like Rania said, giving them a framework for understanding, economic policy and some of the things that they're angry about are losing jobs or outsourcing of jobs, trade deals like NAFTA, things that Trump actually is saying, hey, this is a bad deal. I mean, he's doing it in a completely obnoxious way, but, these are things that are kind of common threads that are sort of popping up, that you hear rhetoric from Trump supporters saying, yeah, we don't like NAFTA. We don't like bad trade deals.
Right.
And and so, those things can be done. They're not all just a bunch of like, hey, let's build the wall. I hate Muslims. They're actually kind of selectively listening to some of Trump's messaging and hearing, oh, we don't like NAFTA. Okay, let's vote for this guy.
Right. Actually, that's a great way to put it. They are thanks for the call. They are selectively listening to Trump. And now let's be sure, let's be clear and be sure there are, if you've seen some of these videos, and I'm sure you can go to anybody's camp and find some crazy people, whatever their political ideology, right? You can find some extremes. But if you look at some of the Trump rallies, you're going to see some downright racist. That's all. I have so many more adjectives that I can attach to that, but I'm not. You can find just some racist. But you do have a bunch of other people who are listening past all of Donald Trump's bigotry and attaching themselves to two key things: his populist message. There's three reasons that people support Bernie's. I'm going through all of the candidates today. There are three reasons why people support Donald Trump, in my opinion. One, they are attracted to his white identity politics. That nationalistic, white, racist, bigoted identity politics. Two, they're attracted to his economic message of somewhat of isolationism, isolationalist economics. And then three, you have those who are supporting Donald Trump to just stick it to the establishment. You have those who are not only to stick it to the establishment, but also stick it to the people who say that they better not support Donald Trump. Having a conversation with a good friend of mine a good white friend of mine from Mississippi. He's a Republican, and when I tell you I have so much in common with that brother, that I have more in common with him than a whole lot of other people. Right? Never mind, we have different race and different politics, but we connect on so many other things. We're in this, I'm not going to tell you who he is, because he was actually giving me the story of how he took some students to a Trump rally. And at that Trump rally, he wanted to expose them to different sides of an argument, to different politicians, to, this is what you do if you study politics. You go and listen to politicians. Because of that, he faced so much backlash from other Republicans and from some of his Democratic circle and friends. He just faced this immense backlash to the point where he ended up saying, wait a minute, I didn't support Trump, but if you're going to tell me something that I can't do, I'm a grown man. I'm a free man. I'll support whoever the hell I want to support. And so he's actually like, in a way of not only sticking it to the Republican establishment, but also sticking it to all the people who are jumping down Donald Trump's supporters' throats. People have a right to do whatever the hell they want to do. And so you have that group. You have people who support Donald Trump because they are attracted to the bigotry and that white nationalism, right? And then you have those who are attracted to that populist message. And finally, you have those who are just sticking it either to the system, to the Republican Party, or sticking it to people who are telling them, what you can and cannot do. It's that kind of world, man. People, you never know what people respond to. But the bigger point is this: those that are attracted to his economic populism, there are some commonalities and there's some opportunities to say, listen, if you're tired of programs shifting and trade deals shipping your jobs overseas, that's something that the Republicans and the Democrats did together. That's something that Republicans and particularly the neoliberal Democrats did together. And the solution would not be another Republican or a neoliberal. The solution would be somebody who agrees with you and says that NAFTA was a bad deal. And not just somebody who's going to say NAFTA was a bad deal, Donald Trump, and also be benefiting and exploiting those deals. All right, folks, done all I can do tonight. It's been good. Join us tomorrow night for the live debate watch. We'll be discussing it at intervals wherever we can. We'll discuss it. I'll be streaming the audio, high quality surround sound audio tomorrow night. I'll make sure you have some really good audio. That's 2. Number 3, like, share, subscribe. Make sure you subscribe. Help us to get to 10,000 subscribers before the end of May. May. Before June. We want to get to 10,000 subscribers. I think we're like 1,400 away, something like that. Easy peasy, as my kids would say. Last but not least, if you really like the Benjamin Dixon Show and what we're doing here at the Progressive Army, I want you to go to patreon.com/the BPD Show and sign up to become a patron. $1, $5, $100. Whatever you want to contribute on a monthly basis, help support independent media, help support progressive independent media as we fight back and do the things that the neoliberals are too scared to do, are just incapable of doing. This is the Benjamin Dixon Show. I will see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Crazy mother.
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.